Nixie, can we start with the preparation of resuming the season? Obviously, the hub concept has been heavily mooted. Is that something that you are in favour of?
Yeah, it's a good question. We're look, as far as personally, I'm in favour of whatever's best for the league. I mean, we're reasonably flexible on whatever it takes for us to play footy at this point. It's been a really tough period for everyone, both inside the footy community and also outside. So the priority at this point is just to get footy played. And if that means hubs, so be it. Look, at this point, we don't know a lot of detail about how that would work, so I can't comment too much more than just saying we're flexible and we'll support whatever they need.
Are there any concerns from your end about what hubs might look like? I know Tex and Danger have said they're not fully supportive of it, and if something does go bad, it could go potentially really bad. Do you have any concerns?
Look, I think when you dig a little deeper into it and you start to look at what the detail is, that's when you can start making big statements on it. As I said before, Theo, it's our players, our coaches, our people, our members, our supporters. We want to play football and we want to do whatever we can to do that. Now, we don't want to put anyone in danger trying to do that at the same time. So really, that's our priorities. The details will come through more around if it does go down that path of hubs, or at what point we begin playing footy again. There's still detail to come through on all of that. So we'll just have to wait and see and be flexible. I'm still with you, Theo, if you want another one.
Oh, no, I'm happy to share it around and I'll come back later on.
Go on.
Matty, Drew from Fox Sports. Obviously, I'm in Melbourne, but just from a hub point of view, how do you think Adelaide, in terms of your facilities and what you've experienced, would be placed to be a hub?
Yeah, another good one. We, at this point, again, we come back to details. Whereabouts would we play the games? Where would we base people? Players, staff, exactly how does the game look? There's so many details, Drew, that can't be answered at this point. It's a little bit of an issue across the board when it comes to, where are we at? What do we look like in 2021, let alone 2020? And that's where I guess we're sitting tight. We're waiting on not just information to come from the AFL and I guess within the footy community, but also information to come from outside of football as far as where are we headed with this pandemic, with this virus, exactly how long will we be in lockdown. So I know you guys want to hear a lot around the hub. I can't give you a lot of detail around at this point.
John Worsfold spoke about this. Sorry. Johnny Worsfold did a press conference just a little bit earlier, and he was really sort of positive about the prospect of, look, the industry's suffering, everyone's suffering. We're going to have to make sacrifices, and it's not ideal for the players to be away from their families. But at some point, the game needs actual footy and it needs money coming back into it. Do you agree with that?
I do, yeah, and I think that's the part about being flexible. I think what he's basically saying there is, we'll support whatever the AFL put forward. Number one, we want to play games of football. Sorry, number one is the health of our people and the health of the community. Number two, we want to play games of football. So that flexibility that we can bring, we're open to whatever that might look like as far as playing games of footy.
Matt, Peter Argent here from the Courier Mail. I want to speak to you specifically about your Indigenous boys, and naturally you played alongside a couple of the superstars of the game from an Indigenous perspective in Goods and Mickey O. How did you see the Indigenous boys tracking going into round one and their performances in round one, firstly? Yeah, well, I mean, as far as our boys that played in round one, I thought they had a fantastic both pre-Christmas period and then post-Christmas leading into round one. Tyson Stengel could not have trained any better to put his name up there to say, I'm ready to play AFL football. Junior playing across half-back, he's, a future star of the game. So we were really happy with the way he'd gone about his training. Coming into round one, we thought our performance as a team
was a little up and down. I thought those guys were pretty solid in the way they went about it. Benny Davis, another player who I thought stood up right throughout pre-season. In fact, without taking favourites, was probably one of our best, both on and off the field. He's a fantastic character, what he brings to our group. He's an entertainer, and he's shown this year that, he's got a lot more than just entertaining off-field. I think he's going to show some really good stuff going forward. So couldn't be more pleased with some of the guys that came in and played in round one.
Have you spoken to these guys over this period about how they're travelling and how they're getting through? Have they? How are they? Where are they?
Yeah, we've stayed in touch. When I say we've got a lot of very good people around the club, both in our player development area, but as well as coaching, our administration. So we've made sure we've stayed in contact with all of our players throughout this period. Our Indigenous boys are going well, and there are varying different cases of where they are around Australia at the moment. We've got players in Sydney and Perth and Melbourne. We've got a core group of guys still in Adelaide. So they're all going really well at the moment, our playing group. That's across the board. I think it's early. A lot of players are enjoying time with family at this point and loved ones. I think the challenge is going to come, if we do drag a little further on and we start talking months down the track, what that then looks like for our players. At this point, they set themselves up really well with gym equipment, with the ability to train, whether that was with one or two people or even on their own at some point in the future. So, the professionalism they've shown, we've been really happy with as an organisation. It's now just a matter of us staying in touch and making sure they're still tracking in the right direction.
Just one last question on this group. With Wayne Molera Jr, do you see him as a future leader of this club?
Yeah, we do. And Junior's already leading in his own way. Everyone leads slightly differently. Sloaney is the captain of the club and he stands out. He's in front of the cameras and he's there for our members and our fans. Well, Junior's, he does a lot of stuff behind the scenes. He connects our group up really well. We were close this year as a group to actually selecting him in our, some of our key leaders. We ended up going with 5, but Junior was right up there.
Thank you.
Hey, Nixie, Max from 10. You just mentioned the challenges. It'll become more challenging for the players if it sort of drags on for months. What sort of challenges do you envisage them facing?
Look, Max, I think this is not just, I'm not probably talking only about elite athletes or, professional footballers. I'm talking about the entire community. I think that at the moment, and I'm an example of it, I've had the last week where I've been forced to spend time at home, but I couldn't be more happy. My kids have got to know me and, it's been 5 years since our first was born that I probably haven't been home as much as I'd like. But I also love footy, so that's why I spend a lot of time where I do. But, to spend some time with them over this first week or so has been amazing. How do my wife and I get along in 2 months' time? We're having a good chuckle and a laugh about that at the moment. We're going really well at this point. So I think there's challenges for everyone. For our athletes, it comes down to that they're required to keep their bodies in a certain condition that allows them to play football at the highest level they can. And that's tough to do on your own. It's tough to motivate yourself. It's also tough to get certain, skills done that they need to get done, like kicking a football, moving around an oval, change of direction. And also some of the weights that we require our guys to do nowadays, you don't have access to a lot of that equipment, especially if we go into, full lockdown like it looks like we will be. So there are a number of challenges, both off field, away from footy, but also as far as training goes, of these guys keeping themselves in good condition.
I just wanted to ask one more on the challenges for you as a coach. The players have to stay in shape physically and mentally as well. But what about you? How do you sort of stay in coaching shape? What are you doing in this time for football-wise?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm probably fitter than I've been for a long time. I've got a little bit more time on my hands to do the odd push-up here and there and maybe get out for a walk with the family. But look, from a football point of view, we're doing whatever we can to stay in contact with our playing group. And part of that is providing them content. We're looking back over a number of pieces of vision from past games, from other games. We're getting our group together in what are small line meetings, trying to simulate what we would be doing week to week if the season was on, without overloading our players. But what we're finding at the moment is a lot of our players are really engaged. You know, they are enjoying the content that we're able to bring to them. So we've had cooking classes. We've scheduled line meetings in where we'll talk about stoppage, and out of round one, you know, there's no hiding. We want to do a fair bit of work on our centre bounce. So we've got a group getting together tonight on Zoom to get that done. So from a coaching point of view, we're still pushing around magnets and talking X's and O's and coming up with what is the best way for us to perform.
I'm all good. Someone else?
I might just go with one. That's right, Nixie. Just wondering on the coaching staff. Obviously, we've seen Paul Thomas, for example, no longer going to be going on. Have you got an idea in your mind? It might be a hard one to answer, but what coaching departments might look like after all of this and how that's going to affect, I guess, the day-to-day operations for you and whatever's left of the coaching group?
Yeah, Tom, that's a really good question. It's one we're asking at the moment of the AFL is just trying to get a little bit more direction on where the game's heading. And that's really based around what the soft cap will be going forward. But there's also a total understanding of, you know, like everyone, the AFL at the moment is doing everything we can to look after our people, but also look after the game. And there are some challenges that we're facing at this point. And one of those is a financial challenge. You know, there's not the money there for things to run as they have. So the expectation is that the game will look a little different going forward off the field. Part of that's, you know, in around what money we'll spend in the football department. You know, footy departments were getting quite large. There was a lot of time put into our, you know, looking after our players' welfare, looking after our players, you know, way as far as education goes. But there's also a lot of key areas of football that we look at as far as, you know, development through our younger group, our lines, you know, working on specific skills and so on. Now, we may not see quite as many coaches going forward if the soft cap changes, but it's a tough one because, you know, we hope then that won't affect the game moving forward, the standard of the game, that we're able to keep the game where it is at this point, which is a pretty high standard.
Matt, it's Liz here from the Tiser. Just on that, with the coaches, David Teague talked earlier this week about, you know, it's a really uncertain time for, you know, all his assistant coaches. How are your assistant coaches handling this time when there is so much uncertainty for them?
Yeah, well, I mean, they're doing it quite tough at this point, but we're sticking around each other, and we're, again, as I said before, we've got the opportunity to catch up as we are now over you know, media platforms. We'll Zoom each other. We'll continually talk about where things are at. We're talking about game plan. We're discussing how to best look after our players. But also, as you mentioned, how do we look after our people, our coaches? Because they're in a really tough spot at the moment, waiting on what will be some news to come out about where soft cap ends up. I think going forward, it's a matter of us staying close to these coaches. And that's what I've been doing, just talking to them constantly and giving them updates on where, you know, possibly things are going to go, and trying to support them through what is a tough time at this point.
Mm. Are you enjoying, on a lighter note, watching what your players are doing on social media? Rory Atkins went viral on the weekend with his faux 100th celebration.
Yeah, I messaged him after and I said it was a pity we were dropping you for that week, but that was okay. I enjoy what some of the social media coming through. I think our guys have been doing some quite enjoyable stuff, and it's right across the board. I think a lot of sports people around the world are posting some interesting things, and it's almost substituting at the moment the lack of sport. You know, we're not getting any new highlights up there or anything from sporting arenas around the world. So it's nice to see our guys getting a little bit busy and getting creative. Rat was probably our standout to this point. I thought, being chaired off at the end in his full kit would have been an interesting one for the neighbours to watch.
Steve from AAP. Matthew, you touched on the fitness before and the difficulties of that. How long do you think you need a lead in? Do you need to do another pre-season? Do you need a month? Or, if for example, they said August 1 is game time, how do you get the players back up to the level of fitness, I guess, and how long will it take?
Yeah, well, it's constantly changing that. I mean, the answer to that basically moves the longer we're out of the game. So if we come back as expected on the 4th, we've got a training schedule with our players at this point that they're going through and they're working through at the moment, doing it really well to this point. That's probably best case scenario, is that the less time less time our players have had out of the game and away from the facility here with our experts, the better. So that time would drop that we'd need then to get them back in playing games again. But the longer this drags on, the harder that becomes. The players are away. Facilities for them aren't ideal. We've done everything, as I said, possible to make those facilities at the standard they need to be. But that period of time that we'd be looking to I guess have them prior to playing a game, that gets longer the longer they're out of the game, unfortunately. But our guys they're crunching numbers on that, our high performance team. Matty Hass has been doing a lot of work over the last couple of weeks, just fine tuning what that looks like as that, I guess, this date continues to move on us. It's part of the uncertainty at this point is making sure we're prepared for everything. We've got a lot of that in place. Again, we'll be a little bit in the hands of the AFL as far as how long they also give us with that, keeping in mind we've got isolation periods if our guys are coming back into the state, 14 days of sitting in their own house and not moving from there. So there's some challenges.
And can I just ask too, just from a personal perspective, what's been the hardest part of this shutdown, since the shutdown for yourself in a football perspective, not the staff layoff, but in a purely football sense, what's been the hardest for you to deal with?
Look, I mean, to this point, if you're talking other than staff layoffs, I mean, that's obviously the hardest. From a footy point of view, it's been tough not having our people around, not being able to get together. But that's society at this point, and so we're not doing it any tougher than anyone else in that space. We've all made sure that. We've kept in contact as much as we can through these platforms. That's been really strong to this point. So look, from a footy point of view, we can still show vision over, over this platform. We can still sit with players and talk exactly about how they're going and how they're feeling. So relationships are still there. They're just not as easy for you. It's not a face-to-face. And with some of that, comes that connection of body language and being able to work with each other and build rapport. So that, I mean, I wouldn't say that's been tough. I quite enjoyed talking to our players. So I've been doing that as much as we possibly can. There's no doubt the toughest part of all of this is the pain that our people are feeling, as are a lot of industries where the money's just not there and the work's not there at this point. And so some people are doing it really tough. And having to be part of that, decision-making process on who's with us going forward is a really tough one.
Matt, I got one out of left field for you, if you don't mind. Do you reckon this is a chance to actually bring the draft age up with this situation being quite extraordinary?
Yeah. I mean, it's a good question. I don't want to make any big statements and comments around that, to be honest. I haven't dug deep enough in and understood the details, and I don't want to make any silly comments without having the education around it. But I would say I think it's an interesting one for us to look at. What it does internationally, they do draft later. If you go to the States, which is a lot of the sports we look at, it gives players an opportunity to give, I guess, educate, get some more education in under their belt, slightly mature, get a better understanding of possibly life, away from high school. There's some positives come out of it. I'm sure there are a lot of cons to it as well. So I won't go into any more on it.
Thank you,
Matty. You're going to be in a unique position. You might get 12 months into your coaching tenure and have only actually coached one proper game. Is there a silver lining that you might be able to be really, really well prepared, even though you're an experienced coach when games do come back?
Yeah, I might be the first coach ever to go 12 months without winning a game. That's one way to look at it. But you're right. The other way is, this is an opportunity, not so much for me as a younger coach or an inexperienced coach, but for us as a group to, we're implementing a new game plan, a slightly different game plan to what these players had the last few years. So to have this time to continue to work through that now, be it, as we've said, there's challenges about it being both online, working across portals. It's been quite tough, but it is some time that we've had to work. We would have come out of that Sydney game straight into a showdown, 7 days later against a reasonably strong informed Port Adelaide side. So to have a little bit more time in between, we've been able to sit down and do some more detail as a group, and that's been a positive for us. And as your question was about probably me as a coach, it's been a positive for me as well to have a little bit more time to work with those players.
Neil Cross, ABC. Just about, you said you'd gone through scenarios and all that of what might come down the track. What do you do if the SANFL doesn't get underway at the same time and you've got a situation where you've got your list, but players outside the team aren't getting a game?
Yeah, and they're all the different scenarios that we're talking through, and the question gets asked by probably those players first and foremost is how do I get a game, coach? I can't prove myself. There are going to be a lot of different scenarios that come through to us. If depending on when we're able to get back into the season, we're going to be cramming games in. There'll be shorter breaks. We'll have a need for a different amount of players on average. Over the last decade or so, there's 33, 35 players have played, across a season from lists. That's going to go up if games are played more regularly. We're going to be forced to play more players throughout the season, with those 4 and 5 day breaks. So we've sat down and spoken that, as a coaching group, even with our players, about what it might look like. Even as close as yesterday, I was talking to Daniel Talia around how he was tracking and, what the season may look like. Imagine we went to 4 day breaks. Tales, how do you feel about playing in 4 days' time? And, then the question comes back on that. Well, what are the games shorter still? And so there's so many different scenarios we're going to see, but they're all challenging. And, we're going to be required to be flexible with, the way we approach these challenges.
Does that flexibility also include the potential that not just you, but all the coaches will have to just simplify their game patterns and plans because you won't get the volume into the players before you start playing, or you just won't have training sessions, you'll just have to go into the next game?
Yeah, I don't want to speak for any other coaches around the league, but yeah, I think you will see a fair bit of that. I think you're already seeing some of that across the board. And again, I'm not speaking for other coaches, but there's no doubt that we've got a pretty good understanding of what a player or what our playing group can take on board as far as information goes. Our game's different to a lot of games around the world. We're not NFL where they've got a 300 or 400 page playbook. Our game is a little bit more, I hate the word random, but there's a fair bit to our game where there's a lot more freedom. And we haven't hidden from the fact that coming into this year, we wanted to be really free our group up in offence. We took a lot of lessons out of the Marsh series and round one in around that. We'll continue to be very flexible with our players on how we go about playing, and we've also simplified that back already. So we won't be doing too much as far as changing game plan coming in. We're pretty confident we can get that right if we're given a good four odd weeks prior to playing round 2.
Cheers, that's it for me.
Hey, Matt, Theo again. Can I just ask, a lot of the clubs are sort of considering what the coaches panel and their footy department looks like based on models from sort of 15 years ago. Now, obviously, in 05, it was no issue for you guys, and 06 as well. Could you just touch on what that makeup looked like when you're at Sydney and how you might be able to implement something you learnt there and what you're going to do later this year and next year?
Yeah, again, Theo, we're talking on, I guess if there are reasonably steep cuts in the soft cap and there's less opportunity and you're going to have to take staff away. The keys to a lot of this come back to what's best for our playing group, what allows them, well, firstly to progress and to develop as people as well as footballers. So straight away you look at welfare, you look at player development. I think that's still a really key area to our game, and it's important we don't take any of our resources out of there, and we've got a lot of very good people that work in that area at the Adelaide Football Club. So that'd be a priority. And Sydney, I take it you're talking about 05, 06 with Sydney. They had some fantastic operators in around that space, and even some of those were the coaches that were there at the time that had a strength in basically looking after others and prioritising others. So we'll look at that space. We'll look at how we structure our coaching department up. There's a lot of things you've got to look into. Analytics, how much stays in that area, because that's been an area that's had a fair bit of commentary around it over the last 2 or 3 years as far as how many computers are in the box on a game day and so on. But there are ways that we're streamlining a lot of that as it sits going forward anyway, without the pandemic we're going through at this point. So as I said, I think trying to answer your question, I think we prioritise our players' well-being. So a lot of our effort goes still into player development and welfare.
So 05, 06 were just ruse and line coaches. Is that basically how that structure was?
There were still development coaches underneath. They weren't actually named development coaches at that point, and not quite the numbers we're seeing nowadays. And so you're correct. The model you're talking about is slightly less coaches in the football department. I don't think you're seeing too much of a change across the high performance area. When you're talking about doctors, physios and experts in those areas, they're really key areas in looking after our people, really important areas.